Alright. Speed asked a really good question, and it's something I missed, and frankly it was something that kind of kept me up all night, because it didn't make sense to me either. I've got videos showing that they both stroke the same, yet one isn't releasing the clutch. Proper spacing versus improper spacing. And I kind of sorted out what the probable cause was before I went to bed last night, with the intent of getting up and checking it. And what we've got here is the cross section of the slave. The spring would be in here, and the TOB would be up here. Unsafe to cut a spring in half, and the TOB just didn't want to cut. It's pretty resilient. But we've got all this plastic here, and we've got our seal, and we're good enough. But we had a 13/16 gap before, and that's right about where we're at in here. I think things deflected a little when I cut it. Shit. Which way was it? Okay, this one was up when I was measuring it. So either I took the measurement wrong, but that's, you know, right where we're at, and there's a stop right there. So when you've got the slave space too far back, and you increase this in here, but we had 11/16 with the other, with it properly stroked. This is the difference an eighth spacing makes in here. This is the difference in stability of this, because you've got more of the TOB surface riding on this. And yeah, there's a seal up here, and yeah, there's a spacer, because this surface does taper a little bit once it gets out of the bore. And we lose some of our theoretical volume compressing this piston, which has a figure 8 cross section to it. 8 with the freshman 15, but an 8 nonetheless. And there's just not a lot of overall room in here. I mean, it's right about an inch, but it gets eaten up real quick by the fact that we lose, you know, an eighth here. If we lose an eighth in setup, there's got to be an eighth to a 16th of head space in here. But that's why it's so critical, because you won't get full release. If it's spaced too far back, you'll hit the stop. Even if you're moving the same amount of fluid, you'll hit the stop, and that's game. You're not moving any further than that without damaging something. And this also means, pretty much unequivocally, that an aftermarket master moving more volume on less stroke, which it does, a 7/8 bore at 1.1 stroke is going to move 0.661 cubic inches of fluid compared to the 0.551. So you've got an extra 1.10, 110 thousandths of a cubic inch volume that you're moving. That's going to translate to almost a quarter of an inch, extra quarter of an inch. It's quarter of an inch is actually too big. It's 209. Quarter of an inch is 250. An extra 209 of movement here. There isn't an extra 209 of movement there. There's an extra 125. There's an eighth. We know we get an eighth. And after that, you're going to start blowing seals. like a gay polar bear. You're going to start blowing seals. So that's where that's at. We were, what, 3/8. Stupid crappy plastic. So I'll call that 3/8. So that's how far down you should be. Alright, you got TOB here, and this part's just hanging out. Up here. It's just hanging out inside the fingers. No chances of damage or anything. But Eddie, that's all the more reserve you have. You know, and you can space it in a little bit more, but what's going to happen is as your clutch wears, the fingers are going to come out. Just like in those first few videos where I had it untorqued and the fingers were sticking all the way out. I was talking about how there's 180 of preload, just based on that initial mock-up without the disc in it and how much clearance there was and the thickness of the disc. I'm like, well, we're going to lose 180 here. As that disc wears, and you only get to wear to the rivets of the friction material, so you're not going to wear a whole 180 out of it and get the fingers, you know, that ½ inch out, but they are going to come out about a 1/16 to an 1/8, which is pretty much the spec, if I remember, for having this thing. And half of the reason for this spec is not just to make sure that we have crappy plastic, is not just to make sure that we have enough travel, but it's to make sure that as those fingers wear, this surface is actually going to start to come back a little bit from where it was. But it's still going to take that same amount of travel to get the same release spec, because that's a fixed lever in there. So it does hydraulically self-adjust, but not the way you think. It comes back instead of out, as opposed to brake. It's the opposite of a brake system, is what it is. Brakes self-adjust by leaving the piston out a little bit, and these self-adjust by bringing the piston down a little bit. So you've got to have that clearance. Otherwise, you'll hit a point where you'll be down like that. And once you're down like that, there's no more room. There's no more room, and if your fingers need to come out that far, push the TOB all the way down like that. And if it needs to go a little further, the clutch won't engage fully, and you will always slip when the clutch cannot release fully. Let's pull this back up a little bit. The seal's actually pretty stubborn in there, but it's got, I don't know if you guys can see it, it's got a decent amount of air gap on the side of it, and it's in its relaxed state. And there's a lot of gap in here, which this seal that's out here, there's a seal up here to help keep dust out. But there's nothing in here, so dust can come around, come through here, because this locking, the lock tab, it's just one little tab. It's just one little tab, which means if you force the issue, this thing will go cockeyed. It will go cockeyed if you force the issue. So the clutch dust particles are so small they can get in there, but where they're coming through is over here, because this side's got a little bit of a shim. I don't want to call this thing a seal, this blue thing. I don't want to call it a seal because it's not. And there was some lube I found inside this thing, and that's another thing. Anything that gets in here is gonna change the volume required. So that sludge and stuff we find in our master, it's going to be in the slave too. And that sealant we have is going to be in the slave too. There's that, not that sealant, that lubricant. It's just like a white gel. It's like a white version of Trans Gel. That's going to be in here too, and that's going to take up space, which is going to push us that further out. So it behooves you to space this properly. You know, so you don't hit your travel limit, so you can absorb the wear of the clutch, and so that you can absorb all the crap that gets in here and takes up volume over time. Okay?